Yeah, okay. We were talking about the possibility of it being a house, but is it a house that's free and clear? Is it a house that has a mortgage on it? Is it a house that's rented? Is it a house that's leased? Is it a house with a lease with an option? You know, there are a lot of ways of that's where the focus, because you're focusing now the subject. The house is a house is a house. You look at it, there it is, it's a house. Brick, mortar, whatever. But how is that house in relationship to you becomes the subject. So change your subject of focus. You're in a situation. This is beautiful, isn't it? You're in a situation. You're in prison, let's say. The bars are the bars. They're bars of steel. They are an object, or whatever the situation is that is a prison for you. That's an object. So, but what you want to change is your subject of focus. You change your subject of focus. You made a commitment to do something that now becomes a prison. So you can either focus on what drudgery it is to have to do that until you fulfill your word, or you can focus on what a joy it is that you get to fulfill your word. The object is the same, doing this whatever drudgery you've got yourself into. The subject, and that's why no matter what the situation is, we can have joy. We can be positive. I look at the guy up there in the wheelchair in Evelyn's office on the picture. He's missing two legs and one or two legs and an arm.
2 legs and an arm.
He's missing 2 legs and an arm. I mean, it's not funny. We always joke about that kind of thing, but you know, it's really not funny. This guy, and yet he has the most gorgeous smile. This guy could be focusing on the object and the subject around that being, I only have one good arm. Or, wow, I have one good arm. And with this one arm, I have done this, and I've done that, and I can draw, and I can paint, and I can write, and I run a business, and I'm taking care of my family with one good arm. There's a guy with 2 good arms and 2 good legs, and he's not doing squat in the gutter, see? Accomplishing nothing. So, obviously, the subject of focus varies from person to person, even though the object may be the same. So if you and I want to get out of prison today, right now, immediately change your thinking about your situation. Well, there it is. He says it both ways. Change your think. He doesn't say change the situation. If you want to get out of prison today, the first thing is change your thinking about the situation. What about thankfulness? I love that with Mom. Well, what are you going to do today, Mom? Well, same stuff. Be thankful that I lived this long. Stay thankful, thankful. You can say, oh man, what a pain. I'm 69. I'm 69. I thought at 69 I'd have this, I'd be here, I'd do that. I'd be thin. I thought at 69 I'd only be 45. And here I am at 69, I'm 75 already, whatever. Or, I'm thankful that I made it to 69. Wow. It's great. Change your subject of focus. As you change your thinking, you will draw a mental pattern for the things you do want in your life, which in turn will dispel and root out those things you do not want. We were just talking about debt a little bit. Chuck asked me a question. I forgot what we were talking about before that. No, I know where we are. Thank God for structures. But how that debt, first of all, debt puts you in servitude to the master of the debt, the master of lending the hand is what it's called. One of the things it's called in the Old Testament. It's allowable. It was allowable in the Old Testament for one believer to loan to another believer or be in debt to another believer as long as there was no interest charged. And there was a whole heart that was really different. And after a period of time, no matter what the debt was, it was to be forgiven after 7 years and on certain years of Jubilee, etc., etc. Then in the New Testament, you don't see much about believers loaning to believers. Really, you see believers giving. You see a pool of money put together where believers that are committed to the Word, one heart and one soul. It wasn't just someone shows up and says, hey, I'm a Christian, I'll take the class. Great, now could you loan me $500,000? It wasn't really about that. There are spiritual decisions that are made, but from the Word, the example of the Word, it was one committed believer or committed believers blessing another committed believer to help them get started in the farm or whatever. The church was to help them get started. Absolutely prohibited in the Word from everything I've seen so far and worked, and if someone has worked something more that they can show me, is a believer borrowing from an unbeliever at all, and then borrowing from an unbeliever and paying interest is completely caca, wacko. So, there you have it. But our thinking about money, if we're in prison in terms of money, and if we're in lack, we are in prison in terms of money. Our thinking is screwy. So to get out of that prison, we have to change, immediately we change our thinking. That doesn't mean that tomorrow you've got 10 grand in the bank, but it does mean today you put 10 grand in your mind in the bank, in your mental bank. Hey, there you go.
Memory bank.
In your memory bank. I like it. You change your thinking from lack thinking, oh, I only got this much, well, there it is. Oh, I only have 10 grand left. I'm down to my last 10 grand. You know, we laugh at that when people say, man, I'm down to my last 100 grand. Now, if you've never had 100 grand, or if you've had 100 grand and lost it, you know, it's just different thinking. See, one person goes, he's down to his last 100 grand. Holy smokes, I wish I had a grand. So one person perceives that thinking as being cocky or what's the right word? Or arrogant. That's the right word. Or arrogant. But to the person who says that, if they really mean that, to them it's like, oh man, how am I going to live on this? Because either their lifestyle is at a certain level, or there is a right kind of thinking about that. If you have a business, you need to have reserves. And even in your life, you need to have reserves so you don't have to borrow. So, yeah, there is a right thinking about that, but there's a wrong thinking about that. The wrong thing is, oh man, I'm down to my last this, I'm down to my last that.
Down to your last anything, because God is your decision.
That's right, God your
So
special.
it's just
So
the
we
way
would,
you think about it.
exactly. You can have $1,000 and think negatively about it, or you can have $1,000 and think positively about it, and next thing you know, you got 2 or 3 or 4.
Yeah.
I mean that literally. A change in thinking, whoop, and now it's like in a very short period, because so many times the solution's right there.
Yeah,
Anyway. It's beautiful. This stuff's great, huh? So as you change your thinking, you will draw a mental pattern. Draw a mental pattern. What a beautiful expression. Draw a mental pattern.
Mental pattern. Mental pattern, which is that you will continue to
Well, let's look up mental and pattern. Okay, mental. Chuck, what is it?
Of or pertaining to the mind, intellectual, done or performed by the mind, existing in the mind, relating to the mind. That's all.
Okay, read that last one again.
Relating to the mind,
Okay, the one before that.
Done or performed by the mind, existing in the mind.
Done or performed by the mind, existing in the mind. Pattern. Go ahead, Evie.
I have a design especially for decorating a surface composed of a number of elements or objects arranged in a regular or formal manner. Let's see if there's anything else in here.
A plan, diagram, or model to be followed in making things. A representative, sample, specimen. A design of natural or accidental origin. Form and style in artistic work. To make a mold. To make, mold, or design by following a pattern. Pattern. Something to be imitated. From patron. Alteration of Middle English patron from Old French. From medieval Latin, patronus. Patron, hence something to be imitated. What do you have, Eddie?
I have another one. A mode of behavior or combination of acts, qualities, etc. regarding a characteristic of persons or things.
Okay, great. That's where that patron, something to be followed. So as you change your thinking, you will draw a mental pattern, something that is done by or exists in the mind, a pattern, a diagram with characteristics to be followed, to be imitated. Well, where is it going to be imitated? Well, first of all, it's drawn. We draw the pattern in our mind. Where is it going to be imitated?
Actually.
Physically. As we change, this is cool, because we don't attack the situation first. Physically. We don't attack the object. We attack the subject. Because the object we cannot always control, but we can always control the subject. So that's the first place we go, to the subject. Well, what does the word say? And then we adjust our thinking according to how the word handles that. The word becomes the subject handling the object. So we take, okay, hey, the word's already given us a pattern. Let's take that approach. And the word says, no prison for you. No condemnation, no resentment, no pride, no obsession, no oppression, none of that for you. You're free, you're not condemned, you have no sin consciousness, you have none of that. No prison. The Son has set you free, you are free indeed. Now, so then you take that pattern, the word, it says, this is the pattern, you're free. So then we take that, we start changing our thinking to the word's thinking, and it forms a mental pattern. Well, what kind of pattern is that? For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, saith the Lord. For as the heaven is high above the earth, so are my thoughts above your thoughts, and my ways above your ways. Right?
Right.
We put on, all of this, plenty of words. We put on, let these thoughts be in you, which are also in Christ Jesus. Every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. We draw the pattern of victory, the pattern, a mental pattern of success, and then it becomes a reality. Proverbs. I believe it's chapter 8. Yes, verse 12. I, wisdom, dwell with prudence, and find out, and the emphasis in this verse is, and will find knowledge of witty inventions. That word for witty inventions is akin to the word for the schematic. The schematic. What is a schematic, Chuck?
It's
A pattern.
detailed drawing.
It's a pattern, yes. Thank you, Chuck Jr.
You're welcome.
Oh, that just hit me
Yeah,
like a rock.
I thought a schematic was like a blueprint.
yeah.
That's a pattern.
In light of what context, in the verse, in the context, we're dealing with,
A
that is,
blueprint
a
is a
blueprint
pattern.
is a pattern,
Of
it's a
building
design,
design.
it's an imitation of
Do what you want it to
what you want it to be. So yeah,
Okay.
it's a drawing.
drawing.
I'm Simon, I'm drawing. That's why drawers are a pattern of... Never mind. Never mind. Sometimes we can work it a little too far. So, and will I wisdom dwell with prudence and will find. We think of that word eureka. Evrika in the Greek. Evrika in the Greek. Will find knowledge of witty inventions, the schematic, the drawing, the pattern. Then we can put that pattern in our minds. Boy, that's like manifestation of believing. Add that verse to the ones you work, Evie. Look it up in the Septuagint, too,
Okay.
for manifestation of believing. Look at that. Because once he gives you the pattern, you believe that until that pattern becomes manifested. Wow. How's that for fantastic? Now, when the pattern in the Word already exists, then we can take that pattern, right? And we can put that in our minds. We can start changing our thinking to the Word, and that will draw a mental pattern for the things you do want in your life, which in turn will dispel and root out. Not just dispel, but root out. It doesn't just grab the surface of the plant. If we keep it in our minds, that pattern that the Word sets, it will not only get rid of it on the surface where it's seen, but it will dig out the root. Whoa, man!
That's what it says.
That's what it means.
Dispel and
Root out. Well, if there's no root, it can't grow back.
That's why weeds grow back.
Right, because you don't get the root. If you don't get
In dealing with people that have had very serious issues, possession, or other just acts of behavior that are very counterproductive, that oppose themselves.
the root. Hey now.
Where are we going? Timothy. Timmy! Timmy! What's your name? Timmy! Is it 1st or 2nd Timothy? It's 2nd Timothy chapter... Two. Oh man, it's all over the place here. I don't think you can start. Look at verse 7. Consider what I say, and the Lord give thee understanding. Synesis, where the rivers run together in your mind. Talk about a pattern. Consider what I say, consider the word, and the Lord give thee understanding. Synesis, spiritual insight, supernatural intelligence. Well, here it's just insight, intelligence. The Lord give thee intelligence. I, wisdom, dwell with prudence, and will find, or in the King James, it's find out knowledge of witty inventions. Verse 15, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Well, look at verse 14. Of these things put them in remembrance, charging them before the Lord, that they strive, that they contend not about words to no profit, but to the subverting of the hearers. Words to no profit. What's the situation when people are contending about words to no profit? Those words form what? Context now, track with me. Those words form a what? A mental sentence. Okay, get with me now. Those words form a mental pattern. And what happens then once you have the mental pattern? If you keep that, what do you get?
You get
The actual manifestation of whatever it was you had in mind. Whether or not that mental pattern, it may look like it's okay, but these words, the mental pattern they form, end up being a catastrophe to the hearers. Distraction. Subverting is distraction. Catastrophe. It ends up being a catastrophe. May look good, but it's not good. It was not the word. That's why verse 15. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not work, study, be diligent. To show thyself approved unto God, a workman, work, that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. But shun, avoid, profane, out of step, and vain, intellectual stupidity, vain babbling, empty discussion. For they will increase unto more ungodliness. There you have again, the pattern becomes the reality. And their word doth eat. It has pasture. The pattern becomes the reality. Verse 18. It overthrows the faith of some, the pattern of the believing of some. They missed the mark, erred, and it overthrows their believing. Pattern becomes reality. Look at verse 23. But foolish and unlearned questions avoid, knowing that they do gender strifes. We're still at that pattern becoming reality. The question becomes the strife in reality. It genders. It births. I don't know what the word gender is. I don't want to guess. Gender. Yeah, is that what it has in your Bible?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, generate, huh? Okay. And the servant of the Lord must not strive. That's not the pattern we can have in our. The servant of the Lord, the doulos, must not have that pattern, mental pattern, which results in actually striving. See it? But be gentle. If that's the real word for gentle, gentleness, it means gentleness encourages the result. It's the gentleness of God leadeth thee to repentance. It's a positive kind of, that gives it to you. The gentleness of God leadeth thee to repentance. It says goodness in King James, but the word goodness is gentleness. It's not the scaring to death of God. It's the gentleness of God that leadeth people to have a change in believing, to change their mental pattern. Gentleness. See it? Gentle unto all, apt or able to teach, patient, forbearing. Why? Because it takes time for people to change their mental pattern. As you begin to, how did they put it in the blue book? As you begin to change your thinking, or as you change your thinking, you will draw a mental pattern. So we're working with people to change their thinking. It takes being gentle. It takes having the ability, after, able to teach. So there's going to be some teaching. It takes being patient. In meekness. We're humble. We don't have a haughty sense of self-sufficiency. Well, what the hell's wrong with you? I did it. Why can't you? Were you some kind of screw up, some kind of a moron? Are you stupid? Is that why? You know. All those things might be said. But you have to understand. It could be said to shock someone, but that is not really the instruction. That doesn't instruct. All that does is, it may wake someone up. See, even in the gentle, do you understand? God still in his word says, hey, we're dealing with eternal life here. And yet, it's not fear motivation. You understand? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. It's not fear motivation, but there certainly are stark consequences to unbelief in the word, are there not?
Yes.
And yet that is not God's motivation. It's simply, okay, this is what would happen if you don't get your stuff together, your poop together. Now, so that's there, but now let's talk about this. The motivation is not from a fear, stark consequences. The motivation is from a gentleness, teaching. All these things should be looked up and worked. Patience, meekness, lowliness of mind, meekness, humility. Instructing. This word instructing is instructing as a child. Like you instruct a child. In meekness, instructing. Instructing as a child. It's that kind of teaching and training. Chuck, you were commenting the other day about how we bring this down to such a level of simplicity. That's this word. Plainness, simplicity, instructing as a child, as we would instruct a child, not as if you're a child, but instructing as you would instruct a child, those that oppose themselves. How are they opposing themselves? Well, for one, they have mental patterns brought on by the words that they have allowed themselves to think, brought on by the things that people have said, subverting of the hearers, the catastrophe. They hear these words, they listen, they start doing these questions, gender strifes, and man, next thing they know, they're in catastrophe. And they're opposing themselves with their own thought patterns. And those thought patterns open them up to all kinds of stuff, whether it's the next thing. See, instructing those that oppose themselves that they may recover would be a wonderful way of handling this. I see that's a break in there between if God peradventure. Instructing those that oppose themselves that they may recover. See it?
Mm-hmm.
Themselves. Well, they're opposing themselves, but you instruct them that they may what? Recover themselves.
Weak.
Don't know what that word is in the Greek. Let's see. Okay? Oppose oneself is the Greek word antidiatheme. 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 To place or dispose oneself over against. To be adverse. To place or dispose oneself over against. This is wonderful, this word, if you break it down. To be adverse. They place themselves. Now, recover. Recover oneself. Listen to this definition. To become sober again. Whoa. Come to one's senses. Recover sobriety. Wake up to sobriety. Wow. Somebody in that AA program read some word. They use that expression, spiritual awakening. When you have that spiritual awakening, the definition of this word is wake up to sobriety. How do you like that? See, to come to one's senses. It's the Greek word ana nepho. Ana nepho. Ana nepho. To become sober again. To come to one's senses. Wow, what does that tell you? People that have done those things, man, oh man, is this hot? I'm just holding myself back from getting into it because time is wrapping up here. But they end up getting drunk. They listen to crap. They start listening to questions. They start, and they become not alcoholics, but they become spiritual alcoholics. Spiritually addicted.
They do.
Wow. And they're seduced to the degree that they have got to continue to hear these kinds of words, just like addiction.
Yeah.
And because that mental pattern exists, all it takes, Chuck, is that image in their mind of whatever, the guys they hang out with, that talk that way, and they're right back there in catastrophe. And they do things like miss the advanced class. There's not one person I've known who, when they come to their senses about the advanced class, doesn't go, how did I allow myself to miss that? Once they go, and when they could have gone years ago.
Sure.
To have missed years of the advanced class, there's not one sober person who doesn't think about that seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, wow. And so we've learned, haven't we, that they can only then see what that spirit allows them to see. So they don't see the catastrophe, the shipwreck of others that they've left because of that. Neither do they see the shipwreck of their own lives until it's so a sober moment they look around and go, my life is in the crap hole. They don't know how they got there. They don't know how to get out. And when they start to crawl out, what happens? That they may recover themselves out of the snare, the trap of the devil, who are taken captive by him at his will. So when they have that moment of trying to crawl out, because the pattern, they were confronted, they were shown, but because the pattern wasn't changed, all that happens is when they're away from you or the word or whatever, the pattern is still there. So all it takes is whatever. A button. Push the button and the pattern starts. They're drunk.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yes, Chuck, what you have to share would bless thousands of people. And not just in one category, but in many categories.
Everybody deals with it.
Everybody.
I'm seeing it more. I saw it. I'm just recognizing what you're saying. I'm just recognizing something, really.
She'll talk off tape. So what we saw months ago, Chuck, on that stupor, even though they're not drinking or using drugs, it's right here.
Still there.
Because the pattern Exit.
Yeah.
Now, so if it's gonna get rooted out, then they have to remain, focus, dwell, continue, abide in the Word, which will change, because as they change their thinking about the situation, they draw a mental pattern for the things they do want in their life. But if they won't believe that the Word is the source of that mental pattern, every influence which is not based upon the accuracy of the Word does what? Comes to naught. Release from your prisons. It's in that same chapter, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow, and this is just foundational class. Every plant, Matthew 15:13, Jesus said, every plant which my heavenly Father hath not planted shall be rooted up. Every influence which is not based upon the accuracy of God's Word shall come to naught. Such influences lead only to imprisonment. So here's what happens. If you're endeavoring to build a 30, 60, 100-fold life, and you have patterns of the world, then those things in the world get rooted out, get rooted up, in the sense that you're not able to build anything. On the other hand, if you stay in the Word, you will root up the weeds. So when you stay in the Word, you plant the seeds and root up the weeds. When you stay in the world, you root up the good plant and plant weeds. Both things work with a mathematical exactness, right? And a scientific precision. Both things work exactly. One roots up the Word, the other roots up the world. It's always our choice what we want planted and what we want rooted up.
And you must stay there long enough.
You've got to stay there long enough. The seed has to stay planted long enough. We know this in nature, right? If that seed is uprooted before or is dug up before it has a chance to root, and then if you dig up the root before it's like what happened at Vince's tree, Vince still has not found all those roots. And that's great. We want the Word so deep in our lives that no hurricane could do it. No, because even though they chop the tree down to the ground, if the Word is rooted deeply enough in our lives, a sprout just happens again. Same with the world. Unless someone stays in the Word long enough.
Yes, stay right.
And you're not in the Word long enough until the pattern, you couldn't even find the pattern.
Right.
You haven't changed long, whether it's 33 days, 45 days. See, people want to pick days. There is no day like that as far as I'm concerned. Now, again, if I see something in the Word, someone shows me something in the Word, I'll change that pattern. It's as simple as that. But at this point, it stays until the entire thought pattern is completely obliterated. That's what the Word calls forgetting. Man says you can, it's always there. I say that is crap. I say, agreeing with the man of God that taught me the Word, who also taught this in one advanced class, the first one I took, that he believes it is possible to literally forget the past. Literally forget. Now, you would so put the Word in your mind that there is no longer a thought pattern of your past. Man, that's powerful. That's where you literally don't know what someone's talking about when they say, you and I used to get stoned together. You literally cannot find that memory. That's when you're delivered. Up until then, keep working. Stop saying to yourself, well, okay, I'm over that. Hell no, you're not. You're over what? If you can say I'm over that, you're not over it. Why? Because that then still exists. It would have to be that you don't have any. That's when you could stop. When there is nothing in your mind you could find that even exists of whatever it is you used to be. It doesn't even exist anymore. It's been erased. It's obliterated. It's demolish your human logic. Blow it to smithereens. Oh, man. Meet the new you. It's so new you that you don't even remember the old you. And so what will it do? It will dispel and root out those things you do not want. Oh, in the center ring. No, this is July 24th, 2003, one day after my mom's birthday, one day before my birthday. It's my birthday tomorrow. You can tell I'm released from my prison. They let me out of the institution and into another institute, Spiritually Dynamic Living Institute. Anyway, I wanted to start this session by Chuck and Evelyn sharing some things that they've been learning and putting together and gelling on the things we've been handling from Release from Your Prisons, or How Are You Limiting God, or Romans, or the various and myriad of things that we've been covering from the Word. So, who wants to start?
I will start.
Okay.
It seems that someone over the night has put some new information in my blue book that hasn't been there before. We were working about the camera analogy again on page 6. And we noticed that on page 6 it says that we select what we want in our picture. This is step 1. You're clear on what you want. Secondly, you use the rangefinder and focus the subject properly. And then over on page, was it one of them was subject? Above that it says if you want an answer to prayer, first get your object in mind. You select what you want in your picture. This is step 1. You're clear on what you want. Secondly, you use the rangefinder and focus on the subject. And in the past, I always glanced over it. But yesterday we did a little word study, just from the dictionary though, the difference between object and subject. And it became apparent that the object is the physical, the goal or the item that we're wanting, believing for, and that the subject is actually our brain, is our mind, was the way I put it in my brain to understand it better. And on page 7, the word subject is used again. If you want to get out of your prison today, immediately change your thinking about your situation, change your subject, focus. And as Garland shared, that if you're in a physical prison, a physical building, a jail or a prison, the way you can get out of it today is in your mind. You can change your thinking about the situation, which here is being called your subject. So if you change your subject of focus, you're changing your mind, you're changing the way you think about it. As you change your thinking, you will draw a mental pattern for the things you do want in your life, which in turn will dispel and root out those things you do not want. So I think it really gelled for me that the first step you do is you change your mind instead of just picturing what it is you do want, because if you are in a physical prison, it doesn't matter how much you want to get out of that building, it might not be available for you to get out today physically, to be on the outside. But you can be on the outside in your brain and in your mind. And you can develop that picture in your brain, and you can work on it from there. And how how so much of this release from your prison starts in your brain with your thinking patterns. The latter part of the page on page 6 says if you want to get rid of something today, you must focus, dwell on what you want. And again, this is what starts in our mind, that the idea and the process and the grinding of the gears, the turning of the gears actually, not the grinding, but it has to start in our brain and it has to develop into our thinking patterns. So our thinking, these individual little steps become an ingrained pattern in our mind, which our thought process can follow. And it can follow smoothly because we've thought about it, we've worked it in our brain to the point where it's a reality. And I thought it was very interesting that in these books, in this chapter, Dr. Werrell has put, if you want to get rid of something today, if you want to get out of your prison today, immediately. And something that's always been very valuable to me that I learned many, many years ago was that, I would come to Garland with a concern or something, and sometimes it was something that I had the ability to change immediately. Maybe it was a job and I didn't like my job and it was really weighing on me, and I just complained about it and whatever, and no matter how I weighed it in my mind, I always stayed at that job. But then I realized that that was something I could change immediately, and the way it was put to me was that you can do two things about any situation, no matter what the situation is. It's either you can change the situation or you can change the way you think about the situation, which is pretty in line with this camera analogy and these 2 pages, 6 and 7, on release from your prison. If you're in prison, you can't change the situation right now or right then, but you can change your thinking about the situation. In the job circumstance, I knew I could change both. I could change the way I thought about my job, and I could change my job. And that bit of instruction has never failed me. And I worked it to the point where I was able to teach people that no matter what it was, whether it was a complaint about a person, whether it was something that